thrilled to welcome the brilliant and courageous activist Jan Goodey to Housemans. Jan is a veteran activist, having been a part of Just Stop Oil and other groups, and having been incarcerated for his activities. We're here to talk about his new pamphlet, out now, copies for sale at the front, from AK Press, All Hands on Deck, a thrilling and readable polemic on the eco-crisis and the degradation of the environment under capitalism, among other things. Joining Jan in conversation, we have Laura Clonasy, is that okay?
Yeah,
Who's also a veteran activist. They're going to talk for around kind of 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open things up for discussion. Let's give them both a round of applause.
Right, thanks very much. So just to outline what we're going to do, I'm going to do some readings from the pamphlet, and then at around 20 minutes time, Laura's going to kindly step in and do a Q&A, and then we'll open for questions from around sort of 10 to 8 to the finish. Okay. I'd like to start actually by reading a poem by Philip Larkin, and it's quite prescient because he wrote this in the 1960s, early 70s, I think, and it's a poem called Going, Going, and it's from the collection High Windows. Going, going. I thought it would last my time, the sense that beyond the town there would always be fields and farms where the village louts could climb such trees as were not cut down. I knew there'd be false alarms in the papers about old streets and split level shopping, but some have always been left so far, and when the old park retreats as the black high-risers come, we can always escape in the car. Things are tougher than we are, just as Earth will always respond however we mess it about. Chuck filth in the sea if you must, the tides will be clean beyond. But what do I feel now? Doubt? Or age simply? The crowd is young in the M1 cafe, their kids are screaming for more houses, more parking allowed, more caravan sites, more pay. On the business page, a score of spectacled grins approve some takeover bid that entails 5% profit and 10% more in the estuaries. Move your works to the unspoiled dales, grey area grants, and when you try to get near the sea in the summer, it seems just now to be happening so very fast. Despite all the land left free, for the first time I feel somehow that it isn't going to last. That before I snuff it, the whole boiling will be bricked in, except for the tourist parts. First slum of Europe, a role it won't be so hard to win, with a cast of crooks and tarts. And that will be England gone, the shadows, the meadows, the lanes, the guild halls, the carved choirs. There'll be books, it will linger on in galleries, but all that remains for us will be concrete and tyres. Most things are never meant. This won't be most likely, but greeds and garbage are too thick strewn to be swept up now, or invent excuses that will make them all needs. I just think it will happen soon. So that's Larkin writing in 1970s, I believe. And essentially, I suppose that's the state we're in at the moment. We're at tipping points, social tipping points, we're at geological tipping points, and the way we go forward will dictate the outcome for humanity, essentially. So my main aim at the moment is I'm kind of putting all my eggs in the your party basket and the Greens and the alliances that are happening. I grew up, my activism grew up in an anarchist background, so I'd lived in Brighton since the 90s. I got involved in the M11 Link Road protest direct action campaign. I've lived on protest camps, and I've got 6 or 7 convictions for environmentalism. I suppose the reason I'm optimistic is that for the first time it appears that there is a galvanised left that could make a difference. You know, I think that if you look at Jeremy Corbyn, if you look at Zach Polanski, if you look at Zara Sultana, um, people are fed up with the same old business as usual. And as an anarchist, if you're going to be more than irrelevant, then you can join up and have a part in this new exciting political framing which is happening around us at the moment. So I think that in terms of my recent activism, I mean, Just Stop Oil, we succeeded in our main aim, which was to stop the new oil and gas licenses. So we did actually keep 4.5 billion litres of oil in the ground, which would have been extracted. And there are other kind of hopeful chinks of light to look at. If you look at David Attenborough's film Ocean, he mentions in that film, the scientific part of that film, that if you do in fact make an ocean reserve, if you have a marine reserve, not only does that reserve regenerate quickly, but it also regenerates 5 times more area than the reserve itself. So there are some initiatives which are working, but for the left, as I see it, the way to work is through solid organisation, community upwards growth. There will need to be leadership. There will need to be some form of leadership in this new party that's happening, because obviously time does not allow for horizontal decision making, consensus decision making, because we're in such straitened times. So I'm just going to read a few pieces from the pamphlet. Basically, the pamphlet's split into 4 or 5 sections. I'm going to start with a piece just from the introduction. Anarchists, like many activists in the mainstream movement, cherish freedom, mutualism and wildness, while the prevailing capitalist governments desecrate our wild lands and seas and our human and animal ecologies, taking us into a world of social license built on AI and technocracy, steel and glass, and a virtual chipped existence which is no existence at all. The existential threat itself is real when you are relying on food supplies from countries that can no longer reliably feed themselves. Spain this summer had a temperature of 46 degrees, which is kind of like Death Valley in America. So you can see these effects already. Spain will be one of the countries that's going to be hardest hit. So that can no longer reliably feed themselves as weather patterns continue to spiral out of control and tipping points are crossed irreversibly. If you want to learn about tipping points, you can do no better than go to Professor Timothy Lenton, who runs the Exeter University Climate Science Department, and his scientific thoughts on the matter are excellent, as is Johan Rockström, who works out the Potsdam Institute. The populist brand of neoliberalism and nascent fascism leading us to total chaos has climate denial as one of its badges of honour, alongside rabid nationalism and warmongery. Now, as we move forward, the idea of closer cooperation between nation states is perilous and fraught with security issues and fear and danger. Bear in mind, guided drone military technology can now be used to explode an armoured personnel carrier by flying into a manned gun turret. How to beat this insidious form of populism? It's through pro-social, well-organised, strategically sound, revolutionary politics based upon cooperation, love and kindness. The fight is for an end to new oil and gas globally, an immediate wide-scale shift to renewable energy, energy conservation, zero waste, free public transport, we naturally veer towards circular, steady-state economies, localised economies managed by organised, friendly, grassroots communities. The next section in the pamphlet is called Collision Course, and it deals with what we're facing. So, anarchists and anti-capitalists have long taken the lead in environmentalism that matters. Their modus operandi has traditionally been non-accountable, direct action conducted anonymously and in ways that avoid, resist cooperation with the authorities. They have always operated largely outside of the mainstream scene, rejecting the liberal values of groups like Greenpeace while actively opposing COP and the other state-led climate initiatives. Bear in mind we've got COP coming up in November in Brazil this year. But in recent years, a new type of mainstream environmental activist has emerged, whose approach involves making public demands of the authorities and gaining social and political legitimacy through non-violent, accountable actions, including acts of resistance and civil disobedience. This new environmentalism has quickly gained traction both in the UK and internationally. The formation of Extinction Rebellion in 2018 was followed by the rapid emergence of campaign groups including Insulate Britain, Just Stop Oil and Animal Rising. Unlike traditional activist groups, these new groups attracted support from a much broader audience, including an older constituency, some from the rural lower middle class, those who tend to embody a traditional moral liberalism and a pre-Thatcherite sense of responsibility to the next generation. Having lived off the fat of the land in the carbon economy, they are finally waking up to the scale and urgency of the climate issue and are now coming out onto the streets to fulfill what they see as their moral duty to save the planet for their grandchildren. And we've seen this older constituency at Palestine Action, at Parliament Square, at Trafalgar Square, and these are brave older people who are standing up for their essential right to, as we know, stop killing children, stop killing the war machine, the Israeli war machine, as we know. Moving on, I'll take a passage from the part 3. So this is Unity in a Time of Crisis. In making the case for cooperation between ideologically diverse groups, Roger Hallam set up Extinction Rebellion along with Gail Bradbrook and a number of other people, Claire Farrell, a number of people set that up. Roger Hallam points to the unlikely alliances that can form in the context of a potentially catastrophic threat. For example, during the First and Second World Wars, when British people found common ground with a non-malignant form of nationalism that transcended class and was a force for good, back then, despite the ravages of the Blitz, people didn't just give up and stick their heads in the sand. They dug deep and consistently worked towards a better life of reconstruction, prioritising forward thinking and a planned and carefully structured way out of demob hell. Such alliances could also form today against today's common enemy. Today's common enemy is not fascism, it's not the right wing, it's the technocrats. Okay, it's the technocrats who are running the government, it's the Fed who runs America, it's the technocrats who are the people who are stymieing our way forward, the corporate leaders. The ruling class, the international professional bureaucrats who lie, steal and cheat, who say it's okay, we'll reduce carbon emissions by such and such a day, using this or that fix. All utter hogwash. Of course, the juggernaut of ecological crisis is already here and bearing down upon the poorest and the most deprived people of the southern and northern hemispheres. You look to people in the Mekong Delta, they're going to be inundated with seawater. That means they're not going to be able to produce rice. Okay? You've got the Caribbean islanders facing ferocious Category 4-5 storms. You've got indigenous tribes in South America forced from their lands by forest fires. Alaskan and Siberian communities facing destitution as the foundations of their homes sinks into the melting permafrosts. Moving on, shall go to, right, the part 2 is resistance from the inside, but before I go to that, I'll just quickly read this last bit. By prioritising cooperation instead of competition, by focusing on social gain, not social control, we can resist fascism and ecological doom. Resistance is naivety at its best. Cynicism is what we no longer need. Industrial capitalism is the target, and climate is the context. Okay. Part 2 is resistance from the inside, and it deals with my experiences in prison. I got a 9-month sentence. I was the first person to be sentenced under the Police Crime Sentencing Act 2022 in April 2022. I climbed the gantries on the M25 in November 2022, and for that I got a 9-month sentence. It was reduced to 6 because I pled guilty, and then I served 3. So it was a stressful time, but I shall read a little bit from that section. So my time in prison was split between HMP Belmarsh, a category AA prison where I was on remand, HMP Wandsworth, where I was in the drugs wing for some reason. Don't ask why, I wasn't on drugs. In the category B prison, and HMP Highdown category C. While UK jails are far better than those in some other parts of the world, such as those in El Salvador, Seacot, Iran or Mexico, with crammed cells, no medical care and sometimes no food, or the same non-protein meals day in, day out, being in prison is still rough. Life is hectic, noisy and disorientating. You land in prison tired, dishevelled and shaken up by days in police and court custody, and get put straight into a 2-man bang-up where your only space is a bunk abutting a perspex window. Your 1 hour of social time is spent getting that form in for your visits, getting your phone numbers of loved ones sorted, choosing your grub for the week, and with only 3 working computers on a wing of 300-400 men, you've got to hustle for all of it. Literally, the cells in Wandsworth are built for 1 man. So you're in there with 2 men. You can't walk side by side from one end of the cell to the other. You have to stay in your bunk while your cellmate walks up and down. So the cells are tiny. In the back of the cells, the perspex windows are normally broken. It's cold. You do have a pipe which you can wash your clothes on. If you're on the ground floor, the rats eat the food outside your window. So your perspex window is open. You have the rats. People drop food from their top floors down to the bottom. The food builds up. There's no cleaners to clean up the food because they haven't got the funding, they haven't got the staff. So the rats literally gnaw the food away outside, literally 5 feet from your head as you sleep, as you read your books. So it's not fun. It's not great. But in prison you encounter all manner of squalor. If you're in a Victorian jail like the Scrubs, Pentonville or Wandsworth, where I was held for 6 weeks, piles of food scraps, I've told you that. In prison, stereotypes are shattered. Silver teeth, scars, light skin, dark skin, Muslim, Christian, it all means nothing. People here are just people. Sometimes in tears, often pacing, always frustrated. I remember seeing a lynx in captivity in a UK forest near Kent, and for hours it paced up and down the perimeter fence, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, tormented. No different from being in prison. If you're fortunate enough to be sent down with other activists, at least you'll have some solace, and if not, at least you'll get a bit of help and guidance from some of the older, wiser cons through those first few days. On arrival at Belmarsh, a con who served us late dinner before we got shoved in our cells just said, "Remember, screws are screws." Being shown kindness and decency is a bonus when all you've had before that has been police doublespeak and lousy food. And not to diminish what he said, because of course essentially prison officers are perpetuating a rotten system, some can be helpful and decent. Right, and I'll just finish on a couple of final pieces. So the final 2 chapters are called New Horizons, and I've given an example of a group that's formed relatively recently. It's called Vegan Support Farmers, and Vegan Support Farmers represents a major shift in approach by calling for a transition into a fully plant-based food system that is both just and sustainable for farmers. They are showing that even historically opposed groups can collaborate to advance shared issues. Crucially, Vegan Support Farmers is addressing issues that affect farming communities. For example, one of the group's aims is to help farmers with their fight for fairer treatment against the cavil of rich, profiteering supermarkets. Up to 40% of the UK's vegetable crop is being spurned by supermarket due to aesthetics, directly impacting farmers' livelihoods. Similarly, with the suicide rate for farmers being 3 times the national average, Vegan Support the Farmers is raising £10,000 to help support the families, friends and communities of some of the British farmers who have tragically taken their own lives. Standing up to an unfair system is the right thing to do, no matter who is being treated unfairly, explains Kerry Waters, co-founder of VSF. And then finally, this was an old protest camp we set up in Worthing back in 2009. There was some ancient woodland called Titnall Woods that was a delightful woodland that they wanted to build a new Tesco's on. They didn't take into account that it was a floodplain. They also wanted to build houses there as well. And this was ancient woodland. Ancient woodland is defined by trees which are over 450 years old. So the trees came before us, essentially, before Tesco. Despite originally being set up by fewer than 10 people with some solid organisation work and a great deal of effort to gain the goodwill and support of the local community, the Titnall Woods encampment flourished. It even had a productive vegetable plot at one point. The issues around the proposed development were consistently aired and kept relevant by the protesters, such as the hideous idea of adding more traffic to a highway that was already a driver's nightmare, and the utter stupidity of building 1,200 new houses on a floodplain. At the time, they said the likelihood of the land being flooded was 1 in 100. That's now gone more towards 50 in 100. Yeah. So this is what we're dealing with. This work also helped to capture the valuable perspectives of people to whom Titnall was not only an ecological asset, but also an important community amenity. A local resident at the time said, "I used to play at Titnall Woods when I was a child. When you build on green spaces like these, you create a lot of angry children with nothing but concrete to bounce off." Okay, so I'm going to leave it there, and should we move straight to the Q&A? Yeah. And then we'll open questions for everyone.
Oh, thank you, Jan. I mean, so much of like the theme of the book, and I think even the talk today, starting from the poem, is around the time and how imminent this feels for everyone. But you've been doing this for over 30 years, so what's your biggest takeaways in terms of that inspiring cooperation and that mutual aid piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was in Just Stop Oil, we used to go to safe houses. So before an action, we'd go to a safe house, and we'd stay there, and we'd work out what we were going to do. We'd work out how we were going to close this road or do this or do that. And one of the things you build up in that kind of environment is it's like a band of brothers and sisters. You're essentially, you feel this incredible bond with people because you've got the trust, you've got the same ideological values, and you know that what you're doing for the right reason. You're not doing anything to harm people, you're doing something that you hope will protect people. So that whole bonding with people is essential, and you can see that throughout any kind of community initiative. You know, people who start up a local coffee shop, or in Brighton we've got a few people who were in Just Stop Oil. Now they've set up a community cafe hub in one of the areas of Brighton where they give school uniforms away to families who can't afford to buy a school uniform, or they charge you, they don't charge you for your tea and coffee, they bring in produce from local allotments and they give it away. So that kind of kindness, that kind of love in the community is what is so important, I think, and that's what you gain from the mutual aid. In prison, I got put on report once. Basically, it's called a nicking, and basically if you fail to move prison, like they came to my cell one day and said, "You're moving prison, Goodey, you're moving prison." And my cellmate said to me, "You know you don't have to go," which was handy because I was ready to go. He said, "You know you don't have to go, you can refuse." So I refused, and I was basically put on report, which meant that everything in your cell is taken out. So if you have a telly, if you have a phone, if you have a kettle, they just take everything away, which buggers up your relationship with your cellmate, because obviously your cellmate is then pretty pissed at you because you've been the reason he's lost his telly or he's lost this. Anyway, so I basically thought, well, hold on a minute, how can I make this good? And one of my thoughts was, well, why don't I try and get a radio? So I tried for days to get this ready, and then I just happened to speak to this guy Frenchie. He was a lovely guy. He was in prison. He was it was a long story, but basically he was in prison for something that I'm pretty sure he didn't do. Whether he did or didn't, I'm pretty sure he didn't. Anyhow, he just said to me one day, he said, "Look, your best bet is, why don't you just go and ask the chaplaincy?" And in Wandsworth there's a chaplaincy where you can go once a month. It used to be once a week, but because of all the gangs in prison, they can't keep different wings going to the same chapel meetings. So that means that you only go once a month rather than once a week. Anyway, that particular steer, it was kind. He didn't have to tell me that. He could have just said, "Oh, I don't care. I'm doing my thing." But he spent some time. He explained it. He explained how to do it, where to go, how to do it. And you just think, well, that's another example of mutual aid in action. I didn't encounter any violence against me in prison because I was in prison for a non-violent action, and people, to a man, they don't like authority, they don't like the government. So anyone who's going to stick it to the government and shut down the M25, they're going to think, yeah man, I like that. And they liked it because they found it funny as well. They thought, how can you be put in prison for trying to do something good? That's what they all, to a man, used to say, apart from the governor, who I had to go to report, who said, "You're the fucking cunt who stopped me going to work that day, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, sorry about that." So, sorry for the language, but yeah.
I think it's good for anyone at the minute because we're seeing so many more arrests happening around this sort of form of civil disobedience. I think in some ways to know that the simplicity of getting by in this type of life is to talk to people. But what advice would you have? You talk a lot in the pamphlet about life after prison and preparing yourself for that. So what advice would you have for people that would not have expected to be in prison for doing the right thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. It often gets forgotten, and a lot of people in Just Stop Oil, particularly the younger people in Just Stop Oil, do feel that they were not given the right support and advice, and obviously when you come out of prison, you don't just go straight back into ordinary life. You don't just start again where you left off. It doesn't work like that. You have to remember how to cross a road. You have to remember how to go into a shop. So I think the important things are be prepared. So if you are thinking of you might have an indictable offence, you might end up in prison, you might end up on remand. You need to understand what that actually entails and how the system works and what you're going to do after. Will your job keep your job open for you? I lost my job at Kingston University. I used to lecture at Kingston University in journalism. I lost my job because of what I did. I wasn't thinking I was going to lose my job. I did. Things like that, you have to really kind of bear those things in mind. And also, when you come out, I was fortunate. There's a Climate Alliance of psychologists who offer free counselling to people who come out of prison. They give you 3 free sessions. So because I was fortunate enough to be in that milieu, I got 3 sessions of counselling when I came out of prison. Things like that are essential just to get your head straight, just to kind of focus back if you've got family or if you're living with friends. It's really important that you have those support networks set up and you're aware of how to deal with your times after being in prison.
That's really nice advice to hear. You touched a little bit before on when people are forming these activist communities, a lot that brotherhood and the camaraderie is built on ideologies that match, but actually you've been part of loads of groups whose ideologies didn't quite match, and loads of people have talked about this in the climate activism movement and why it may have not taken off. We're seeing it now within all forms of activism, people sort of coming not quite from the same ideological perspective but the same want to change things. Do you have any advice from all the little groups that you've picked up on minimising that conflict that comes from ideology and focusing instead on the behaviours people making change?
Yeah, I mean, I think old anarchist meetings in the past, you go into a room, everyone would leave their phones outside, everyone was really edgy, everyone would be like, oh, is this person undercover, or is this, that and the other. And what I found through that is, yeah, well, I mean, you do successful actions, and things get things get done. However, the more I see of organisations like Just Stop Oil, Insulate Britain, even XR, you have a far more open system where there's um, less paranoia, I suppose is the word. So I think if you are going to organise, it has to be transparent, and you have to feel comfortable in that environment, which is why these organisations have been called in by your party. So your party has been asking people from Just Stop Oil and Time to Assemble, which is the group that's calling for the House of Lords to be abolished and be replaced by a House of the People. The Humanity Project, which is a kind of cultural wing of Assemble. So all these different groups have form, and the form is they know how to organise, they know how to mobilise. Roger Hallam, love him or hate him, is a fundamentally brilliant mobiliser. He can mobilise people, and other people in that milieu can do the same. And at the moment, it's numbers that count, because you're an irrelevancy if you go and if you're just thinking, well, I'll go and do one action, and maybe I'll burn a few SUVs, or I'll do this and that. Well, it needs to be something now. We're talking now. We have this head of steam politically. Okay, so your party stuttered a bit at the beginning, but if they can bring it back together, and if there's a younger constituents who take the lead with your party, and as they say, they're going to give it to the people to run. Well, let's see how that works. But essentially, you go on what works, and what works is that the organisation within groups like JSO, Insulate Britain, XR, and other community initiatives does work. It's effective, and it's proved effective because it has had results. Not all the results we wanted. We wanted free public transport. We wanted every house to be retrofitted with insulation. We wanted solar power. We didn't get all of that, but at least we got it on the agenda, and at least it's something now which is being taken forward. As climate becomes increasingly urgent, as there'll be one or two big events that happen probably next year in the climate that are going to knock people for six, and people are going to think, hold on a minute, yeah, no more business as usual. Sorry, this is what we're going to do. And we need to be at that stage now, really.
I mean, I hear so much in that is this real call for this multi-generational working, where you've got this younger cohort that you really want to activate. They're also kind of guided and protected by this older cohort that are able to take different kinds of risks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the whole purpose of this pamphlet originally, was to bring anarchists and the mainstream closer together, to kind of explain. I mean, back in the day we had Tinker's Bubble down in Dorset. So Tinker's Bubble was like, and it still exists, it was like a respite place for people who'd been on these road protests, Newbury, Twyford, the M11, Salisbury Hill. And there was this purpose-built kind of little farm with a community vibe where people could just go and just, if they were burned out, they could just go and be in nature and be looked after and feel valued. So I think that's really important, that aspect of it. And older people, and older people, veteran protesters can guide younger protesters. There's so much. People just think, oh, anarchism, oh no, that's chaos. That's right. Well, it's not chaos. It's to do with community. It's to do with support. It's to do with a lack of authority, because we don't need the authority. The authority is within ourselves. We know what we need at this stage, and it's to join together with others on the left, and not just become an echo chamber of theoretical politics. Let's make anarchism something which is a principle-based help to what's happening at the moment, to bring things together. That's what I'm all about. I mean,
I think lots of people are getting there now, by moving past those ideological spaces. Do you think you'd have different advice for a young person you meet tomorrow in activism versus someone in their 60s?
I would say to someone in their 60s to share their experience and to share what they've learned over the years. And I'd say to someone in their 20s, look, as much as you might not want to listen to this person, was. I mean, I remember being in one meeting at a bookshop in Wickham, I think, and a mutual friend of ours just sort of launched at this woman who was in her 40s and was talking about some kind of protest she'd been involved in. And this mutual friend who was in her 20s just went absolutely ballistic and said, look, this is my future, you know, I'm in my 20s, I haven't even had a career yet, you're talking about your career, you've already had your career, you know. And there is that anger and that resentment that needs to be processed, I suppose, so that, you know, there is a kind of a meeting, because obviously younger people particularly feel completely let down and completely, how are they ever going to, you know, buy a house, or how are they ever going to feel stable when, you know, rents are going up, you know, you're not going to get on the property ladder, and this, that and the other. So yeah, it does need careful work to mend those kinds of problems.
I mean, it reminds me of the line of the poem about, you know, if we continue to pave a way, all kids have to bounce off as concrete. And there's a lot of blame put on young people for somehow not galvanising themselves. But it's nice to remember that that's actually their reality. They're kind of living in this sense that they're not going to get some of the things that we had. But obviously we need to work out how we all listen to each other.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah.
Do you have a favourite action? Or something that was like the most memorable thing you've ever seen?
Well, on September the 11th, we were in Dicey. We were at Dicey, the arms exhibition, the arms fair in the Excel Centre. So we got as close to the Excel Centre as we could get. I mean, it's not really a fun activity; it's memorable. Anyway, the police chased us throughout the streets around the Excel Centre, and we ended up being chased up this flyover, and one of the women fell over, and the police just leapt on her and grabbed her and started really ragging her about nastily, pulling her hair, this, that and the other. I stopped, but I didn't go back, to be honest. I wasn't as brave as a friend of mine who stopped, and he went back and he got her de-arrested. He was a big chap. He got her de-arrested, and I just thought, that's the nicest thing I've seen on an action, you know, actually, you know, really sort of putting your life, well, not in danger, but I mean, he could have got a serious, you know, truncheon on the head. And then, obviously, we just ended up going into a pub, and at the time, we just watched the Twin Towers coming down, so it was just an incredible sort of, whoa, you know, we're like here to stop arms race, what's going on? So yeah, that was quite a day.
I can imagine. Oh my God, to be in that space on a day like that.
And I was with an American guy as well who was protesting, so it was particularly tricky for him. Yeah.
Wow.
But, yeah.
And I mean, I think it's just, I think that those live actions, if anyone here hasn't done activism before, I think it feels really scary in a weird way that you don't know, like, if you show up on the streets, what it's going to be like. But the truth of the matter is, people are looking after each other in these spaces all the time.
Definitely.
They're going back for each other.
Definitely.
They will do what they can to really.
It's that brotherhood, sisterhood. It's there. You know, it's like a, you know, Brighton, a bit of rock. You know, it goes through one end of the rock to the other.
And he said he wasn't brave that day, but I've seen this man be brave on many junctions, and that way of like looking after people, stopping them getting arrested, stepping in, creating moments where we all wear different privileges.
Yeah.
So we're all able to stick up for each other in different ways in these spaces.
Yeah.
I'm gonna open it up to the floor now, guys. So any questions from anyone in the audience? You just stick your hand up and we'll come to, you can introduce yourselves or not, anarchist or not.
My name is Maria. I think one of the reasons why so many elderly people are being are the ones who are protesting regarding the Palestine Action Campaign is because they can afford to, well, they've decided that they most probably aren't going to be travelling very often, because if you have a terrorism conviction on your record, then that could have impacted your visa situation, getting into Europe and any other countries for that matter. And that's why it's mainly elderly people, because a lot of young people don't really want to take that kind of risk.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, I think when I was in Insulate Britain, the Guardian did this really kind of they did a 15-minute video on us, and it was Damien Gale, who's the Guardian's environment reporter, and he started it off with, "Oh, and I'm here with the Insulate Britain protesters. They've got their Tupperware with their orange and their sandwiches." So it was all quite, it was all done in a quite light way. But I mean, at the same time, I mean, I'm an older person. I'm 60 now, but at the time I was about 58. But I was chucked on a pavement. I was, one guy got out of his car and literally he said, "You're going to move, or I'm going to lick you." And he just came up and he just grabbed me and chucked me against the curb. So I mean, older people do still have that harm's way, but you're right in the sense that they can afford to do it because they have that,
But especially the ones who are in wheelchairs.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
know that.
Totally.
Yes.
Yeah, that guy Mike Higgins, who 62, and he was blind as well, and in a wheelchair. And yeah, I was there when he was arrested in Parliament Square. Yeah.
So that's very good interaction between older people and younger people.
Totally. And he got a lot of people, going up and chatting to him, and learning about what he, why he was doing it, and there was a good interaction there. So yeah.
When you talked earlier about bridging that gap between younger and older generations, I see it at probably the DOJ protests where
Defend our jurors.
where older people are even telling the younger people there that might be standing around with a far more active anger, we're here doing and making this bit of a sacrifice because we don't want you to have to live through this. And actually, I think that's a real healing moment that happens between these two groups of people who still have different ideas about how to achieve the same thing. Anybody else have questions?
I'm Chris. So you've talked about activism and mobilisation transcending generations and transcending class. Is there a sense with this now being very clearly a global problem that it's going to start, that mobilisation can transcend borders as well, that organisation can happen on a larger scale, or is that something that...
Yeah, well, I think what's happening, particularly when we did Just Stop Oil, we had a network called the A22 network, which was a group of similar groups throughout Europe and America. So it was Last Generation in Italy. There were groups in Australia. There were groups in America. So I think what's exciting in the current state of play is, yes, it can transcend borders in that. Say, for example, your party got 20 or 30% of the vote at the 29 election. So going up to that point, what might lead to that being a success could be copied by other groups in Europe or copied by other groups in South America. I mean, this is where, okay, love it or loathe it, XR has been successful in that it's gone from, I think Via Campesina is a bigger organisation, a farmers organisation in 183 countries. But anyway, regardless of that, the whole organisation and strategising of XR has gone global. It's become a global, around the world. And I think with your party, say we did have that success, it's something that could be copied and it could snowball in other countries. So I think, there is definitely that possibility, and that's why people are getting involved now in the mobilisation part of this, because the feeling is we can win this one. We can actually have a success here. I'm not an economist. I don't know how it would work in terms of how you dismantle the capital system. However, I do know how to mobilise, and I do know how to organise, and I do know how to get people to that point where they feel that they're doing the right thing.
It feels like, I suppose, if we've got on this one side anyone that's worked in business, right? Everyone shares business tactics and strategy tactics, and you see that in the business world. It's the same thing happening now in the activist world, is that the tactics get shared.
Yeah.
And the inspiration seems to happen in different pockets where something that happens in Spain last weekend makes a group in London do something different.
Yeah. I mean, we we may not win the war, but it's that whole thing of like just not putting your head in the sand, not kind of it's taking an extra step. Like there's an activist in Just Stop Oil called Batesy, who's he's kind of a Buddhist guy, and he's got grim determination written all over his face. So whenever he's arrested, he just has this stone face. And he used to give us a pep talk the night before an action. So we'd be in a safe house in Heathrow or wherever it was, and he'd just say, "Look, everyone in this room is on a journey, okay? Some people are happy to do the weekend stall. They'll give up their Saturday and they'll go and set up a stall in their local shopping centre, calling for aid for Palestinian children, calling for, giving money to Greenpeace, whatever it is. And then you've got the other end of the scale, and these are people who I talk about in the pamphlet. There's one, I went to visit a female comrade in Sen prison, and her views were, well, my resistance goes on inside prison as well as outside prison. So I remain a vegan in prison, and everything I do in prison is exactly what I would do on the outside. So she was helping people in prison to sort out their probation, do this. She set up a class, she set up a knitting class, she did this and that. Now, she's on the record as saying she would die for climate change. So someone asked her, would you die for climate? She said yes. She's done one woman protest, she sat in the middle of the road on her own, So that's one end of the scale, and that's the other end of the scale. What Batesy would say is, do what you can, and then try and do a little bit more, okay? And then just carry on as you go, because we can't ignore what's happening. Those of you in the room with children, you can't ignore what's happening. And with elder relatives, you think that now is the time where you do step up, and that's what this is all about. Just trying to exhort people to do more than they're currently doing, I suppose.
Oh, it's such a nice sentiment. I feel like, Jan, I've got to say every time I speak to you, that kind of call to action gets felt, and I feel like people in the room are picking that up. I can see it in front of them. Yeah, maybe I can do a little bit more. Maybe there's something I hadn't thought of that fits me as a person. Maybe it's not this other thing over here that I see being reported on the news. There's something else that I could do to just do a little bit.
Well, there's loads of like Time to Assemble run these Zoom calls on a Thursday. So if you're just thinking, well, I'm not that active, but I can sit in on a Zoom call and I can have a say in a Zoom call, do that. Join a local group. I went to the Green Gathering this summer, which is a festival in Chepstow near Wales, and the numbers of people I met who were just so fired up by the community organisation they'd started. They'd done a seed saving class, or they'd started organising neighbourhood meals, together. This is what we have to get away from in where we're living now. We're also wrapped up in our lives, and it's super individualisation. Everything we do is about the individual. Get your new iPhone, get your new this, do that, do this. Be more of an atomised person. We can't do that anymore. It's about community now. There's a book called Lifehouses by Adam Field, is it? Adam Greenfield. Yeah, and it looks at the state we're in, and it says things, things like having a community hub in your neighbourhood. So having your own repair shop in your neighbourhood, sharing tools, helping we did it through COVID, we did that. We all sort of helped neighbours, my next door neighbours, if they couldn't get bread, I'd bake them a loaf of bread, we all did it. We are social animals. We're not atomised individuals. Essentially, it's not a dog-eat-dog world. It isn't. Take it from me, it is not a dog-eat-dog world. It's a world of cooperation, kindness and love. That's where we're at. That's what it's a world about. And the more we realise that, that's the more that you get involved in these community initiatives. And that can't be ignored by governments, because governments don't like the control being taken away from them. Yeah, but we can do it. You know, we've got the numbers. Remember that. We've got the numbers. We can do it. You know, we can say enough is enough, and we can say no. You're not fiddling about with business as usual. You're not tinkering. We want root and branch, radical change, and we want it now, not tomorrow. We want it now.
And I think us being the instigators of that is a really powerful message. And you are right, because we did change the way we lived in COVID. And we've all sort of forget this beautiful power of a group of people that started acting very differently to protect one another. It's very obvious, and even in the stories of when you're in prison, people actually act to help each other in these circumstances.
Yeah.
At the back there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rhea. Thanks for coming.
Hi.
So, you said that the real enemies are technocrats.
Mm.
And I'd like to hear your thoughts on data centers and the very capitalist model, and something that is emerging in Spain through a cooperation between the Mondragon government and Mondragon corporation, the cooperatives corporation, that is involved in setting up their own type of data center. Now, I don't understand very well how this type of data center would be less pollutant than a traditional data center. And sometimes I struggle with the cooperative movement compartmentalizing things a bit. So it might be that it's very democratic and decisions are made in a very inclusive way, but I still struggle to understand how much we can afford the resources that are going to be needed for data centers can be cannot be part of this conversation. So I don't know if you know about this. They call this cooperative approaches to AI and to technology. So it would just be something that I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
I don't know about the cooperative side of it. I mean, in terms of, I know obviously the increasing amounts of CO2 emissions coming from data centres is quite frightening. I realise that. And if you look to countries like China, I'm kind of guessing that this whole idea of social license and the insidious creep of like technocracy into our daily lives, I mean, you notice it when you go out. You can no longer just look at a menu. You can't even walk up to a bar these days without someone saying, no, you have to order it from your app on the phone. So, no thanks. I'd like to go up to the bar and see. So, do you know more about this?
I don't know that specific case study. I will say that the variations of the internet over the last 30 years, there's been this promise of a democratized web that can be used for forces of good. But the reality 10 years down the line is that has not happened. And only did that not happen in the time that all these groups were using these forms of technology, it was used for other purposes. So in Extinction Rebellion, they used so much technology to promote their work. It's what got the movement going. That also means that most people within that group have now been profiled. We probably now know that as a level of Cambridge Analytica and the meta crisis. So I think we know now as humans that any of these tools that we use will also be used against us. And that's the balancing act. Can they prove their worth? I'd argue no. And I think most people are starting to see that. We didn't win against plastic, right? We can still see how much plastic is in the world. When we talk about climate emergency and the real things, plastic's everywhere. Technology is the same, bit harder. But I think we as real humans probably know the things that aren't helping us. How we as humans start living without these things is a kind of big question for us all to ask ourselves as individuals, and to start looking at that in bigger. I personally would be so anti-data centers for the rest of my life, no matter who's telling me they're going to do any social good. But as a non-expert, without knowing the case study,
I think it's also a kind of over specialisation. So I think in societies today, you're seeing greater specialisation, when increasingly what's going to happen is we're going to see that we're going to start to have to ration food and things like that. You know, if we're looking at reality, if we're looking at the current situation, you know, what is it, 2030, they estimate we're going to go 2 degrees. Okay, so that's, you know, not long to go to that. And even I think the British Insurance Association has put together a report, and in an appendix somewhere deep in this report, they actually state that, you know, by 2060 are we looking at possibly 4 billion people fewer on the planet. So I think when it comes to actual reality, people start to realise that, yeah, rather than making SUVs, we probably should be turning those factories into wind turbine factories. Rather than having data centres that look at our consumption of Instagram or whatever it is, there should be a centre which is producing food under kind of polytunnel type technologies, you know. So I'm guessing that it's the last kind of gasp of the capitalist system in that sense, and that the reality will start to creep in increasingly as we see more of these life shock events hit countries like Spain, you know, like in Madrid, or, you know, Barcelona, where there's droughts. You know, people are fed up with tourists in Barcelona. People just want to be able to live, and like increasingly in Spain, I think it'll be, you know, more difficult to obviously produce food. I mean, we won't be complaining about lettuces not being in our supermarkets. The Spaniards will be complaining about not having enough food to eat. You know, so it'll be a third world problem hitting a first world country. You know, which will be a change. But it would be something that increasingly we have to live with, and we have to adapt. Just as, you know, trees are bellwethers at the moment. You know, all the diseases that are currently happening to trees, like Chilara, ash dieback, oak beetle disease, everything is coming north, including migration. Everything is coming north because of the stress caused by heat and water loss. You know, that is the main focus, I think. I mean, I'll be interested to talk to you about the Spanish thing maybe after, because I don't really know a lot about that, but yeah, that's my thing on that.
do we have time for?
Yeah.
Yes.
Imogen, you mentioned feeling optimistic, which is something that I am struggling with. As someone who's not at the moment involved with any like activist communities, where can I go for good news, media-wise, or you mentioned Zoom calls, which I think.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Time to Assemble, you've got the Humanity Project, you've got various new groups. Obviously, if you want to go to the next Palestine Action Support in November, so there are various things that you could do. I mean, I think you're a younger person. What would you?
I was in this spot 2 years ago. Like, I'd stopped doing any forms of like activism. I wasn't in any communities, and I'm very anti-tech, so I don't like going on Instagram to find things. And I just started going to the odd events I saw in places. So a couple of them were people meeting in rooms like this, having chats. A few of them were the protests, and I was meeting so many people that were so like me.
Yeah.
And honestly, just like looking for someone to have a chat to about their feelings about what's happening. That its own little journey got found. I think that's like a big part of activism that gets missed. Like, it's quite a fun self-exploration journey where you get to explore a different part of your life, because no one's trying to tell you to do this. If anything, most people are like, stop doing this. So it's supposed to be fun. I think that's where
Yeah.
like I can always, every time Jazz speaks about activism, there's so much optimism in it, and I think that's because it's been a life's journey of your passion.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think Michaela Loach, who writes about environment and climate, she says that there has to be an element of fun in what we do, you know, even in activism. So even like volunteering for an afternoon in a community orchard, or you're going to meet people who are into that kind of lifestyle. And also you're going to learn a lot. You know, I work in community orchards in Brighton, so that's my day job. So I work in the community. I kind of plant trees. I look after the trees, and then I hand them over to the community. It's a permaculture trust in Brighton, and a lot of young people come to volunteer for the afternoon or the morning, and you know they go away and they come back again because maybe we taught them how to prune a tree, or we taught them how to ID a certain fruit tree. But what we're doing is important because obviously it's a free form of food for people on council estates. So they've got their apples, they've got pears, they've got this and that, and that's what I'm saying about moving outside of that individual philosophy that capitalism is built on, and moving more towards that kind of neighbourhood assembly. So join a neighbourhood assembly, or join a community event that's taking place. Just looking for things in your local, you know, even a local paper, dare I say it, you know, just to sort of get something like that from them might be helpful.
And don't forget the local libraries. There's still a bastion of brilliant people, brilliant information.
When you talk about young people, I wonder if you're getting young enough, because I feel that very small children, and you talk about small children, they're very receptive to pretty much anything, and the national curriculum really restricts the kind of things that you can teach children. So, I mean, what's your view on how you could change how that sort of thing is delivered, so that children, because also, I mean, you'll know that children will go home and tell their parents how they've got to be behaving as well. So, how can that change? Because that's a government thing. The government dictates the national curriculum, and it is very stringent now, worse than ever.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you have maverick teachers who kind of don't abide by the curriculum, and that's always nice. Those are the teachers we remember, aren't they? But yeah, I mean, in terms of systemically how they teach climate and what have you, I'm guessing as things become increasingly urgent, agendas will change. You know, different governments will come in, and suddenly people will cotton on that, you know, younger people need to know what's going on. They need to know the real story and have it as part of a core part of the, you know, forest schools should become a core part of education in that sense, because the skills you learn there are skills that will help you in life, you know. Whereas media studies, or, you know, I don't know, I mean, it seems to me that the more practical skills that you get from school are the things that will set you up for life. So more of that, maybe that will happen, but, you know, just through necessity, or it will happen through, you know, changes in educational philosophy, you know, and a new government perhaps.
I think there's probably some opportunity there in local lobbying. Like, we talk a lot to our MPs about rubbish collection. We talk to our local MPs about what their particular schools are teaching. Or we're kind of getting them to try and get a bit more on that argument. Because, like you say, there's a point where reality is going to hit. There's a point where we're likely to experience more electricity outages. At that point, it becomes a bit easier to say to an MP, why aren't they talking about this in school? If we all start doing it, writing MPs letters sounds so silly, but honestly, if hundreds of people are doing it, it drives them absolutely nightmare. It takes up so much time. They have to respond to it. But no, I think that's I love that question. Just like, how do we get them younger? Like, how do we find them super young? It's just, yeah, I'm fun for that. Are there any other questions, guys, in the back? Yeah?
I have a question. I think, like, as a young person, if I get, I think, like, finding my own way and finding community is, like, it's a concerted like effort and it's a challenge. And I think a lot of people my age can struggle with that because it really have to go out and find these things. I found this online on Eroding Empire. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking to people. And I just wonder if you have any ideas on how we can make that. There's obviously also an issue that people often feel so alienated and so individualized. On how we can make that more accessible to young people.
Well, someone said to me, look, rather than write this pamphlet, why don't you just get on TikTok and put 10 ways to avoid arrest and do a video kind of thing. So I mean, there is that. Where did you say you heard about this event?
Eroding Empire.
Eroding Empire.
Yeah.
It's a London listings thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it links onto radar.scot.net.
Yes.
Okay. What do you think would work? What do you think would make kind of the difference?
I don't know. I think like when you go to school, when you have university, I recently finished school, so now I'm kind of not doing anything. It's a really strange period because I've had like this community that's kind of been given to me at school. Like I go around, I have my classes, and I speak to people, and I have my community, and it kind of all disappears. Especially as all my friends are now going to university, who I did have are now going. So I think it's really difficult. But I think just having like these community spaces be like more accessible and more available. I just don't really know how we do that.
Well, I mean, we know of a group of people down near Bristol who they're in their 20s, and to avoid the kind of the property hell that younger people face, they've kind of just taken over an older building. Yes, they had to buy it, so there has to be some finance involved, but literally they're running sort of muck jobs. They're working in co-op, they're working here, they're working there, but at the same time they're refacing this whole building. They're turning it into a kind of a place for music, a place for community, and they're living the life they want to live. They're not being told, you must do this, you must do that, you must get a job as a lawyer, or this, that, and the other. They're actually turning this building, and they're learning skills that they're doing all the time. So they're learning how to limestone wall a bit of a brick wall. They're learning how to plug in electrics. They're learning how to plumb. So all these skills are skills that you can pick up from family members, friends, or just kind of a vocational college course. That's one way around it. Other ways are, I suppose, it's difficult to squat now because the laws are really difficult, but there's always that aspect, there's always that avenue as well. You can squat a building, a commercial building, rather than a house. You can, when we did Insulate Britain, after Insulate Britain, a few of the people in Insulate Britain were builders, and they set up, from their building knowledge, they set up a couple of cooperatives where the younger people got involved in setting up an insulation business, and it was kind of funded. So little things like that, setting up a little cooperative. It's those kind of things that it's just taking responsibility for yourselves and just thinking, well, we're going to do this our way, and you can game the system that way. You can kind of get grants and what have you, but having those practical skills, I would say, is really, really essential. Knowing how to plumb a sink, knowing how to wire up a plug and stuff. These kind of skills are things that will definitely hold you in good stead, I suppose, but it's working out a way to do it. When I came out of prison, I did a mechanics course at my local college, so I was with loads of 18, 19-year-olds, and I did a level 2 in mechanics, which kind of means, I could actually work for the AA, not that I'm going to, although one of my relatives said, "Oh, that must be a great job." The people are like, "Oh, you're here." But yeah, I mean, essentially, having that skill has helped me because it's meant. Obviously, I had a high-paid job. I was a university lecturer, and then I went from that to being a gardener. So I haven't got any money essentially. But having that ability to mend a car has meant that a couple of people said to me, "Oh, if you service the car, I'll give you 50 quid, or I'll do this." So those kind of things are kind of good to have, as well as having. I don't know what you might have professional things you want to get into. You might want to do professional things, but having that practical skill set will always help you out. In the property you go into, or however that works out. Do you want to add anything?
Community building is the most unsexy thing in the world. It's why it dies like every time, and why it gets so little attention. But the rave culture that you see now, that's the coolest thing in London, to go pay £30 for a rave on a Saturday night just to get in after queuing 3 hours, started from black queer culture because they didn't have spaces to go to, and it was a fight. But it's because they wanted to listen to their music and they wanted to dance. So any young person, I'm past that now. I'm like, find the thing that lights your soul up. Find 2 or 3 people that have the same thing, and do mad shit. That's it. Because there's no right way to do this. That's honestly how communities get born and movements start. And 50 years down the line, the capitalists will be coming for your creative endeavour and trying to capitalise on that. And then that's how you know you probably did it right in the first place. But I think the journey is the most fun bit. Getting out, learning random skills that you don't think are going to be helpful are weirdly helpful. Mine's sewing. That was my sewing. I hope that's going to get me into many doors in future. Anyone in the back? I can't see. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Adrian. I wanted to come back on the fact you said that you are right now putting your eggs in your party thing. Could you say more about why you're optimistic about that? Especially as an anarchist, there would be a controversy about party politics and power co-ops the best and these kind of things. How do you approach it?
Yeah, I think since I moved from anarchism into more sort of mainstream protest, my anarchist values have stayed the same. I believe in wildness, I believe in a lack of authority, I believe in we can look after ourselves, I believe in mutual aid, I believe in love and kindness. However, I think the relevancy of anarchism today is only in so much as it can be effective. And I think your party have asked people in Just Stop Oil, can you come and help us to run some workshops, because we're going to be going around the country. Sarah Sultana's going to do these various meetings and we want to do some workshops that we know you're good at doing. So I think it's all to do with practicality. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If you're a hardcore anarchist and you just think, well, no, I'm not going to get involved in that because it's like, it's liberal middle class and it's not going to work, and I don't want anything to do with it. These people have kind of worked in banks or whatever it is. Okay, fair enough. I mean, that's your right. You decide you're not going to do that. My take is that practical necessity dictates that you're either relevant or you're irrelevant. In my mind, if you're in an echo chamber and you're just sitting around talking about anarchist theory and you're talking about this and that, and there's no kind of real structure to it, nothing that's going to make a real difference, you are irrelevant. And I think that, personally speaking, I want to be at the stage where I'm giving what I've learned through my anarchist past the same principles to this new movement. And the new movement is going to be, we assume it's going to be direct democracy. It's going to be a party where the people actually run the party. That's the hope. I mean, like all things on the left, maybe it'll splinter and it'll all end in what have you, but up until that point, at least we can build on what's happening. And it is exciting. You've got this new Green Party leader, you've got a head of steam with him and his policies, and you've got a real opportunity to build a counterpoint to the rhetoric of the right and reform and the conservatives, and I can see this really taking off and being something immense, something that can actually make a real difference, not just like a kind of cosmetic difference. So that's why I'm putting my eggs in that basket. Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts on that? Were you coming from a starting point, or is it?
I have sympathies for anarchism, so I would I'm not sure. I'm also not British, so I guess I would I would ask you then to say more why you think it would make a real difference, because of course there is always a level of pragmatism to have, and you shouldn't be dogmatic about party politics is always what will, like, it will never win, or something, like it will never do anything good or something like that. I agree with that, but what makes it that it would be different this time?
I think because of the urgency of the situation, so that people have woken up and realised now that we do have to do something completely different, and also I suppose it's kind of the end of days for the capitalist system, in that private jet culture and this, that and the other. I mean, it was summed up to me the other week when two Just Stop Oil people were up in court for spraying Taylor Swift's private jet or something, and it was like, you just think, well, it's so absurd. We've come to this stage where it's just literally it's got nothing to do with the real world. You're locking up people for spray painting planes, and yet what's actually going on? Well, what's going on is we're coming to the end of the capitalist system, because it's specialised that much that it can't really go any further now. And what's going to happen, I think, is that we will rely on a social tipping point. So as well as the geological tipping points that we face, the 9 planetary boundaries, if you look at Johann Rockström, that's all explained there. We have social tipping points, and we're reaching those now, where people are just starting to say, right, I'm going to get arrested at Palestine Action because I'm not going to be told that I can't, stop a genocide. I'm going to do something about this. So people are fed up, and the more people who are in the mainstream who come to us, anarchists being more on the radical flank, the more people in the mainstream that come to us, it creates that social tipping point. So it has more of an effect. That's not to say that we're still going to have ecotage, we're going to have sabotage, we're going to have more people now. Disaffected, non-violent direct action people are going to move into different forms of action. So you will see a rise in violent actions being against property, if you consider that a violent action. That depends on your political views. So I think we're all fighting in the same direction, but sometimes you have to swallow your principles, your theoretical principles, for the greater good. And I think this is one of those occasions. So like in the Spanish Civil War, the anarchists fought on the side of the communists and what have you. So there was that joining together, and I think this is a similar situation where you join together with all the people you can possibly get to bring those social tipping points. I'm not saying it's going to be the middle class elites who like the touch paper of revolution, but certainly you need support from all areas of society to make those changes. So that's how I see it.
Do we have any more in the back? No. Oh, thank you, Jan. I mean, I think that's been such a journey of really thinking about the time we actually are in right now, the tipping points that seem to be sort of descending upon us. I think so much of today that I've taken away has just been about the ever-ending optimism that's needed, the kind of love and kindness, the getting practical, the multi-generational working and finding your brothers and sisters in arms.
Yeah.
And the finding our own little individual ways to take the next step.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
this is Laura. So
No.
thank you to Laura.
Thank you.
If I could just close by thanking very much Housemans and Al Anderson and Mike at the back. Thanks very much. You guys have been superb. Real pleasure to work with. And, I'm going to be signing books, so I've got the books at the back. So if you want the money from the books is going to it's going to Change for Good, which is a charity which looks after long-term prisoners who come out of prison. And the other group is the money's going to is Green and Black Cross Prisoner Support, and they support people in prison for political crimes. So the book is produced by Active Press, who they're a workers' co-op, so they're non-profit making. They have offices in Bristol, London. And like I say, it's £1.50 or donation. If you don't have money, then I'm happy to give you a copy free, so don't feel obliged to pay if you haven't got any money on you today. Thanks very much for everyone for coming, and yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
Oh, dude, honestly, every time I speak to you, I'm like, it's the inspiration I need to keep going. I love it.